Weekend is all booked. I apologize. I think my head will be cut off in the whole first part of this video. Today I am reviewing A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. L'Engle? I don't know. I never took French. Time is about a middle school aged girl. I believe she's about 13. Her name is Meg. She's from a fairly large family. She has 2 twin brothers and her youngest brother is about 5. And I think her twin brothers are about 10, maybe 9 to 11, somewhere in there. And her parents are both scientists. Her dad has been missing for like 4 years, 3 or 4 years. So her baby brother, who's 5 or maybe 6, but I think he's 5, doesn't really remember him. He's been gone his whole life, basically. So that's just kind of some of the background information on Meg and Charles Wallace, the baby. There are a lot of really beautifully written passages in this book. One of them is right off the bat in the first chapter. It is about Meg feels like she's dumb, but I think she's just too far advanced for the classes that she is in. Her parents are both scientists, like stupidly smart scientists, and maybe she's just not someone who's meant for a classroom setting where there are a lot of, standardized tests that we deal with. And this was written in the 60s, so I'm sure classrooms were just a lot more rigid and stupid then anyway. Who knows, maybe they weren't. But there are a lot of passages in this book that are really beautiful. Meg was talking to her dad and was like, I don't want Charles Wallace, everyone thinks he's weird. She was like, I don't want everyone to think he's dumb like me. And her dad's like, you're not dumb. You and Charles Wallace are very much the same. That Charles Wallace just does things in his own time and in his own way, which is just so beautiful. These parents are clearly very understanding of their superior children. And I was like, that's just so beautiful, and I wish more parents were like that. Anyway, so there are 3 other main characters that we meet very quickly. The first is Mrs. Whatsit, which in the movie I believe will be portrayed by Reese Witherspoon. I'm very excited about the movie, which is why I read this book and why I'm releasing this video before the movie comes out. We're about 2.5 weeks out from the movie release, so at the time of this filming anyway. So I'm really excited to go see it and see how Ava DuVernay has put this together in a visual way, because I'm a super visual person and the trailers alone look super beautiful. So there are these 3 other main characters, Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch. I believe Mrs. Who is going to be Oprah, and Mrs. Witch is going to be one of my personal favorite people, Mindy Kaling. Those right here. And Mrs. Who speaks in riddles. Mrs. Whatsit is the youngest of the 3. I want to say they're witches. That's kind of our closest analogy. In this book, there's a lot of things that Meg can't fully explain or understand, because there's a lot of like interdimensional travel, if you will. I don't want to say it's time travel. It kind of is, but it's just very scientific and just kind of a little bit of like childhood fantasy, which is really fun and really neat. And these 3 witches kind of guide Meg, Charles Wallace, and Meg's acquaintance, Calvin, through the dimensions of time, trying to locate Meg's father. When we are first introduced to Calvin, he seems like super moody. I wrote in my notes that I think he's on drugs. He's a little bit older than Meg. He's like 14 or 15 to her 13. So he might even be in high school, although in the 60s, 9th grade was still middle school, so in some instances. So maybe he's still in middle school with Meg. I just feel like that maybe didn't translate as well into the future, because this was written in the 60s, early 60s, I believe it was published. Little nuance didn't translate as well for me, but that could totally just be that it is almost 60 years later and I'm reading this for the first time. I'm almost 30. I saw in a group online that I'm in, people were reading this as adults and it just didn't click for them. Like it's a very beloved book. It won the Newbery Award, which is a huge award. So, I mean, it is a great book. Anyway, more of my notes. Chapter 4, Mrs. Who speaks in riddles. So, a lot of her stuff isn't very clear, and especially to a 13-year-old protagonist. I'm sure that's really confusing. But one of the things that Mrs. Who says that I think we can all relate to at this moment in time in 2018 is, the more a man knows, the less he talks. So flip that, it would be, the more a man talks, the less he knows. And I think we all know someone with a lot of power right now that does a whole lot of talking. You know who I'm talking about. I think that also just applies to people in general. The more that you talk, the less you know. And that may be that you're trying to talk through something to understand it. It also may be that you are trying to bullshit everyone around you into thinking that you know more than you do. So we learned that Meg's parents have been working on a tesseract, which helps you travel through time and dimensions and everything. And that Meg's father has been lost, kind of, while he's been traveling about in the Tesseract. Any preposition you want to add? I got you. So all the Tesseract talk made me think of the Avengers and Loki, and then I was like, oh my gosh, in the movie it's going to be Chris Pine, and then we would have all the Chris's in the Avengers, and it would just be a hot Chris fest, and I am here for it. I don't think that is what this is at all, but just in my little brain I was like, we got Pine, Pratt, and Hemsworth. Sign me up. With all this Tesseract talk, something that Mrs. Whatsit said that I really enjoyed, because it just kind of applied to life in general, and it was really beautiful. Though we travel together, we travel alone. So, you know, I've got these two best friends in my personal life, and we have traveled through a lot of life together. However, we are 3 individual humans, so we all have our different perspectives, even if we've been in a place together. We all have our different perspectives. We have our different understandings because of those perspectives. And I was just like, that's really beautiful. It hits on the, although you may know someone really well, you still don't know anyone really, type of thing. So, I mean, it's kind of really sad, but also beautiful at the same time, which is kind of how a lot of this book is. I apologize. I think my head will be cut off in the whole first part of this video, so I just readjusted my tripod. Yeah! I also don't know if I'm centered anymore. I don't think I am. So Mrs. Whatsit reveals that she was a star, and of the 3 witches, she is the youngest. But we learn that she is 2 billion years young, which, I mean, we know that stars are like long dead by the time that we see them in the night sky. So that's, again, something beautiful and sad in this book. Don't learn if Mrs. Who and Mrs. Witch are also stars. I kind of feel like they probably are, and that these witches all come from the same stuff, but we don't learn in this book. This is part of a quintet. I have no intention of reading the other 4 books unless Ava DuVernay makes the other 4 books into beautiful films. They land on this dimension or planet called Camazotz. You've probably seen it in the trailers for the movie. All of the houses look the same. Everything is identical. There are children out in the yards either bouncing balls or skipping rope, and everything is happening in rhythm. So the jumps are happening at the same time as the bouncing of the balls. So they see a mother come out of each house and call the children in, and everyone picks up their balls and ropes at the same time except for one kid whose ball bounces away from him. So they are like, hey, we need to get answers. They are without Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which at this point in their quest to find Meg's and Charles Wallace's father. So they're like, hey, we need answers. Let's go to this house and return the ball to the child. And the mother that answers is like, oh no, my child would never drop a ball. And so I was like, is Camazotz Stepford? Like, everything's identical, everything seems perfect. It's real weird. And it's probably going to be one of the more disturbing aspects of the film, as it was one of the more disturbing aspects of the book. This book is also very intelligent. There were quotes, Calvin quotes The Tempest, and there are a lot of SAT words that some of them I had to look up, and I have a master's degree. So granted, it has been 12 years since I last took the SAT. Well, no, longer than that. Almost 13 years. 12 and a half years since I took the SAT. I was in the first class that had to write the essay, so I know it's changed probably at least 2 more times since then. But there are a lot of SAT words that I was not familiar with, so I totally get why this is a book that children read in school. At some point in their travels, the children, Meg, Charles, Wallace, and Calvin, go through the dark thing, and it really depletes Meg's energy. And she is resuscitated by these beasts. She calls one of them Aunt Beast. She is resuscitated and nurtured like an infant. And the feelings that she goes through, the anger and confusion and sadness, all the way back to her kind of happy self. It's more of a neutral state, more happy than sad, which is how I would like to think of neutral, as more happy than sad. When she gets back to kind of her neutral self, this whole little interlude feels like a big metaphor for mental health, and I really, I don't know if it is. I don't know if that is because of my struggles with mental health, personally with depression and anxiety. There was a whole passage that felt very much like a description of depression, and I don't know, I haven't done a lot of research on the author, so I don't know if she herself experienced depression and was writing from her experience, like I know J.K. Rowling was with the Dementors in the Harry Potter series. But there was just a beautiful passage that described the feelings Meg was feeling after going through the dark thing, after it kind of enveloped her and went in her. And I was like, this is really kind of deep and dark for kids that may be reading this book, but as an adult I really related to it and could understand kind of the feelings that Meg was feeling. And that got real deep, so cheers y'all. So we get to chapter 11 of 12 chapters, and there's still no sign of how to get back or get back to their home and back to Mother. No spoilers here, but we've got 2 full chapters left, and there's no plan of how we're getting these children back. to their dimension, to their mothers, and everything. And I'm like, I mean, we gotta wrap this up, but I don't want it to feel too rushed. And of course it did feel a little rushed. There's also a little romance between Calvin and Meg, and it also feels very forced. I was really looking forward to just kind of a children's book where there's no romance. And I mean, the first Harry Potter book, there's no romance. It's a fantastic book. I just drunk reviewed it, so click up here. Am I pointing right? Because I'm going to give myself a major high five. I mean, the first few Harry Potter books, which are targeted for the same age group, involve the same age children. No romance whatsoever until the 4th, 5th, and 6th books, really. And I just felt like maybe a 15-year-old boy does have those feelings for a 13-year-old girl, but that Meg at 13 was like, oh, I do like him, blah, 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 it's great. And maybe she does have those feelings. I know I had major crushes when I was 13. I think my heart was broken for the first time at 14. I totally get it. It just felt very forced into this book. And it kind of took me out of it, as did the rush of the end. Meg gets really insolent in the end, and it's just, it felt, there were a lot of things that after reading this book for, you know, 100 pages, and we get 150 pages even, we get to the end and it's like, you've kind of changed who I thought Meg was, and maybe that's who she was all along and I just didn't see it, just like humans in the real world. But there were just some things towards the end that I was like, this doesn't seem in line with the book. And maybe that is because I'm almost 30 and I'm not the targeted age group for this book, but overall I enjoyed it. Like I said, there are some really beautiful passages, really beautiful imagery. Highly recommend. Personally, I think you should read this when you are the targeted age, middle school and high school. It may resonate more with middle school and high school kids than it did with an almost 30-year-old. I do give the book only a 3 out of 5. But like I said, I do recommend it. But that is all I have for you now. Join me next time when I will be reviewing Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. If you enjoyed, give this video a big thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and let me know what you think of A Wrinkle in Time. If you read it as a kid, let me know, and let me know what your initial thoughts were if you read it as an adult. I'm really interested in how that kind of differs after reading that in a Facebook group that I'm a part of. And let me know what you think of the movie when it comes out. Bye!